you go.
Hey everyone, how's it going? Gonna have a good weekend. Lots of coding.
Yeah.
Some coding. A little bit of coding. 2 weeks left. 2 weeks left. All right, guys. I'm just gonna breeze through some announcements real quick. We have a guest speaker who'll be joining us in just a little while. So I want to give her enough time today. I've also posted all these in the Slack. So everything I'm going to say, as always, is all written. So if you forget anything I say, it's all right there in the document. Just a heads up for this week here for events. Today we will have Indaria joining us in a little while to be a guest speaker. And then on Wednesday, we'll have professional headshots for the class. So you might remember Liz from our kickoff. She took videos and photos, so she'll be here on Wednesday. So look sharp if you'd like, get a haircut, all that good stuff. Just want to give you some notice. Optional, but if you'd like to wear just like a dress shirt or dressy clothes, I don't know, you can dress however you want. But she will be here. We'll have like a backdrop and everything. So just a heads up for that. Then on Thursday, Linda will be joining us, job placements as a coding bootcamp grad. So please try to be in person and on time for her talk as well. Last week of activity, just again, breezing through all these. For the potluck on Monday, we'll ultimately let you all coordinate for facilitating all that and all that good stuff, but just let me know how I can help with that. Will is out this week, so he was kind of handling some of that, so just let me know what you need on that front. Just a heads up for the potluck too, if it's not obvious, but please bring things in the containers and easily cleanable. I don't know if we'll have access to like the kitchen or oven or microwave, yes, but if you need to store anything, like ideally if you can, just like bring it directly here, just for the potluck stuff. I don't have any questions or concerns on the potluck stuff. Otherwise, you can coordinate in the students channel. All right, I'll let you all figure that out for coordinating. Mail day, again, Will is facilitating some of that. I see that some of you have already dove into that spreadsheet for the mail day stuff, so thank you. I won't say too much more to not give anything away, but feel free to coordinate in the student channel again. And thank you to those who have already written those notes. Really appreciate it. Student stipends, we've officially spent, I think we're at like 55% now. So we've added $100 to every month stipend. So you know how $500 is spent, so spend it. And submit the form like you normally do. We do have ACH enabled now, which is the preferred payment method. But if you do still want to check, send me a message on Slack today, and I'll cut your checks today. Otherwise, we'll do ACH. Everyone's cool with that. So just shoot me a note if you want your checks today. Otherwise, we'll do ACH if that works. ACH is like, so you have to submit a quick form to us. ACH is 2 to 3 days. Check will be right now. So it's ideally ACH is easier for us, but whatever you like to do, I can do check, no problem. Yeah. So if you submitted the form, it will be ACH by default. If you want to check today, just ping me. And that goes for everyone too. Just ping me on Slack.
Even if we submitted the form?
Yeah, exactly. So if you've submitted the form and you want your check today, hit me up on Slack. Otherwise, ACH in 2 to 3 days. Anyone have questions on that for reimbursement stuff? Cool. Also, just quick reminders. I know I've been saying this every week now, but please review that last week rundown. It includes stuff for the capstone expectations, resources, example decks, a template little presentation deck you can use as well. And in terms of next week, the final week of classes, please try to do your best to have like your deck mostly done by Sunday the 18th, just to give feedback on it throughout that entire week. And also so you don't have to be rushing on that Wednesday night and doing it super last minute. I know because I say that and I do things for the last minute too. So do it well in advance, so that way you have some time to get feedback on it for any loose ends there, and you can get feedback all throughout the week from all the instructors and TAs. So do your best to sort of have that deck done by the 18th, and expectations and sort of what to do for that deck is all in that document for the last week of the class rundown. So if you have any questions on that, don't hesitate to reach out to me. We also have a bunch of little videos we have for Hack Upstate that we've live streamed. So they're 2 to 3 minutes, yours will be 5 to 6 minutes, but they're very similar in sort of like the class markup, like what the content you're doing. Talk about your problem, talk about your tech stack, the creative process, the things you've solved, the things that made you bang your head on the keyboard, all that good stuff. And so we have a lot of examples of that as well if you'd like to take a look at videos from our previous presentations at Hack Upstate. And one last thing here, I just have on the document. We'll play it by ear for that final week. I anticipate that dry one will just be on that Wednesday. But if folks want to get feedback in advance in their decks, certainly open to doing dry ones as well each day of the week, just to give you more practice and more feedback. We'll talk more about that next week, but that's an option if you'd like to do that. And that's another reason to try to get your deck done by Sunday the 18th. And if you're freaking out about the capstones, don't worry. Take a deep breath.
Don't worry.
Take a deep breath. You have technically, you still have like 2 weeks, give or take, right? You've all come a tremendously long way. It's been a journey, all of you. So don't hesitate, take a walk. Just get up from your computer, come back to the problem, and it'll come to you, right? So I know it's going to be a bit of crazy these next 2 weeks, but that last week of class, you're going to have so many instructors and teaching assistants and folks in our community coming to help you with those finishing touches. We're going to have this whole room Monday and Wednesday. On Tuesday, unfortunately, we'll be at the front of the venue. I'll talk more about that next week, but we'll have this whole space. So if you want to use any of these spots here for one-on-one time, whatever offices are open, those couches, it'll be just open workspace for you to get whatever you need done. Getting feedback, getting all that help, etc. And finally, for those capstones, practice. Seriously, just do it in front of a mirror until you have it down pat. I get really nervous when I present stuff, like really nervous, so I practice a lot. So if you don't need to practice, that's fine. If you are good at winging it, that's awesome. But I prepare notes in my presentations. I practice probably 10 to 15 times for like any deck in front of larger people. Don't feel like ashamed, like you have to practice that. Like I'm admitting it, like I suck at like presenting stuff with a lot of people. That's okay. Like that's like not common for most people. So just practice a lot and you'll get it.
Practice this stuff before I come to teach you guys.
Yeah, it's like
Talk to my computer screen.
seriously. Yeah, so practice. Like don't feel like embarrassed or ashamed by that. Like practice and practice to each other. If you want to set up time, with the instructor just to go over your deck, before the final class, don't hesitate to reach out and do that. If you want to get feedback on where you're at so far, do that. Keep taking advantage of those one-on-one times, whatever you need to help you cross the finish line with the capstones. All right. And then finally, I'll say this again Monday, but also make sure that if everything crashes and burns, you have a way to do an offline presentation. So for whatever reason, your web app crashes and you can't demo, make sure you have your local host spun up so that you can switch over quickly and still be able to demo something. Demos are really intimidating and like it's kind of a meme where like things are expected to go wrong. So always assume the worst case. Always have a local host backup. Your slide deck, have it offline on a thumb drive if you need to, all that good stuff. So make sure you're good to go offline first, just in case everything crashes and burns. Not gonna win, nothing will, but you never know. We've had it happen more than once at Hack Upstate, so just be prepared for that. And I think that's about everything, guys. Any questions anyone has for me on capstone stuff or anything I just said?
The deck and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I'll actually copy the link right now for the last speaker rundown in the Slack channel. And everything on there in terms of the last week and also the decks are all there. So I'm going to ping that out in just a minute. I got to be on my computer, but I will ping that out in just a minute. And that has the template deck on there as well. Any other questions before I introduce Dario?
One question.
Yes.
When we graduate, are we still going to have access to students?
Yeah, so you don't lose access to anything.
Oh,
So we will likely make the videos on YouTube unlisted, so you'll still have access, but we probably won't have the entire curriculum to the public. But we'll provide you a document with links to all the videos, basically. So we might have one video a week, basically, on the YouTube channel, but you'll have access to everything. So nothing will change for any of you in terms of access to anything. Yeah, that's a good idea. So you won't lose access to anything though. So. And if you do for whatever reason, just let me know. But you should. Cool. Any other questions, folks? Comments, concerns? Yes, Kelly.
Our memberships at cohorts, do they expire the day of graduation or do we have until the end of the month?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you'll have them to the end of the month. You might even have them 1 month after. I'm not sure. Let me double check. No promises, no guarantees, but I will check with Dallas and see what we can do. We'll try to get you at least the end of the month, but at that point, it'll be out of our hands, and then you'll have to ultimately return the cars to Dallas and not me. So that's just the disclaimer, if you will. Yeah, if you like to do that too, absolutely, absolutely. So I'll make a note to follow up with Dallas on that. Thank you, Kelly, for the question. Any other questions, folks? Gone once. All right, if there's nothing else, I would like to introduce our guest speaker for today. Daria would like to come up. So we're very fortunate to have Daria joining us today. She's the founder of the Creators Lounge and a co-working space right here in Syracuse, which I actually had no idea about until we connected a couple weeks ago here. So they just opened a couple weeks ago, and it sounds like a really awesome space. And we're really fortunate to have her here, and I think you're really going to enjoy her talk today. And if you're interested, you can also set up some time with her if you visit the space. But without further ado, Daria, I'd love to.
Hi, everybody. So are you guys gonna move the slides or?
Oh yeah, you can. You can just
wanna
stand
do
right here.
or
I can.
tell me to push it.
You can stand here if you want, or we can control the deck. Whatever you want to do.
Okay, if someone
Okay,
wants to
Joey, you
control
mind?
it,
Yeah,
I'll
thank
be
you.
fine.
Thanks, Daria.
Thank you.
Just say next slide.
So yeah, I'm Daria Jones. I'm the founder and CEO of the Creative Lounge, which is a co-working space for creative entrepreneurs and corporate professionals. We host a lot of programming to help people start, develop, and expand their businesses in the same as careers. We host programming to help people start their careers, expand their careers, and grow. And yeah, so that's great. We have an online network of over 2,700 members, and now that we have the space, we're just looking for our members to come on instead of going them more often. During the day, I also work full time for the city of Syracuse in the Department of Neighborhood and Business Development on the business development side. So that probably took up a lot in itself. So I do like a lot of the business development, the projects, downtown, North Carolina, and things like that. But I started off in technology. Well, I went from a background in technology to public health, and then to business or public relations, which helped me help other businesses, and combining the two or the three. So today we're going to be talking about bridging the gap between technology and minorities and how you can use the skills that you're learning here and apply it to, your job, but also to generate income in between or even as an additional stream of income once you have career using the skills that you learn. And thinking about your brand, because I'm a PR professional, and what do you want to use, what type of brand you want to create with the skills that you're going to be learning or that you have learned in code. What type of change that you want to make in the world using code. All right, so the next one. Yeah, so about me, and then then we can go to the next one. So if we can combine our talents and skill sets, we can not only be employable, but the next generation of creators or the creators of the next generation. The whole concept of the lounge and everything that I do is for us to not only be consumers of things that's been created, but creators of things. So that can be apps, that can be software programs, platforms, things like that. Instead of using all of this form of technology and platforms, we like to transfer people's minds and thinking of creating. And so the next one. So here we have Idris. Nancy, have anyone ever heard of Idris? No? Okay, I love Idris. So he's a 21-year-old tech genius, and headlines say that he's going to change the world. He started out when he was in 7th grade in middle school. He picked his middle school was having a problem getting people to class. So he created an app to do so. And this is my daughter here. Oh, sorry. Don't let you say hi. Okay. I don't know, you're gonna have to do. Yeah, so he basically created an app to help navigate people in his middle school get to class in the 7th grade. And he learned code by watching Steve Jobs announce the Apple iPhone. And he went to the library and learned everything he knows now on code. So he's a self-taught coder and now architect. And he designed, he helped design Instagram, Uber, Facebook, Beyonce, Kanye, and he's most known for his recent collab with Nipsey Hussle, creating his smart store. Have you guys heard of the smart store? Yeah, so he is the tech behind that. So one of his missions is using technology as well to bridge the gap in the community between minorities becoming employable, but also, being the creators and having your own consulting companies with that. So we're just gonna watch his TEDx talk, which is about 8 minutes. If you can play that, and then we'll talk about branding and things like that.
This is the story of how Daniel, a soon-to-be college grad, integrated with the intern and expert Tyler. The key to her dream job. Our story begins in her head, where she has many tabs open, 3 of which will be pivotal. The first, her senior thesis about journalism's effect
Oh,
on
this is an ad. Hold on.
She subtracted.
I think this is all right.
If I can see further than most, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. Isaac Newton. I didn't really like how that sounded. It was more singular than plural. So let's update our operating system in real time. If we can see further than most, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. That sounds much better. Hello, everyone. My name is Idris Sandhu. I'm 21 years old, and I define myself as an architect. I've had the experience of interning for companies like Boeing, Northrop Grumman, and Google. I've consulted for many companies, including Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat, and I'm now focusing on affecting the culture directly through alliances with the likes of Nipsey Hussle, creating Smart Store, and even Kanye West with our initiative in Chicago. When most people see me, they just see a cool, young, smart kid, but most people wouldn't believe that I grew up in parts of Compton, Harbor City. Most people wouldn't believe that I've skipped so many adversities, and most people wouldn't believe that at the age of 9, my father took me to a country in West Africa and abandoned me there. But I've still prospered, and I'm standing here today. But today I'm not here to talk to you about personal accolades and achievements, for they're truly micro in the scheme of the macro. Today I'm here to expose you to a premeditated thought we've come to call Gen Z Plan A. So who are Gen Z? Gen Z is widely known as the internet generation. They grew up in a world dominated by the presence of the internet. They are said to be very big on individuality. They are said to be very optimistic, but most importantly, they grew up on the internet. Gen Z might be one of the most advanced generations, but for a minority growing up in this era, we risk the chance of losing a seat at the table. Gen Z Plan A is a culmination of ideas, guides, and exposure to information for a modern day millennial growing up in this era. It is designed to break down the barriers that currently exist within technology. Gen Z Plan A is about pushing forward new ideas through exposure more so than education. Because you see, whereas previous generations needed education, this generation can benefit more from information. This generation understands the importance of information. They understand that information is the highest form of broadcast. So today I'm here to expose you all to 3 pieces of information that you guys can apply in your life, as well as for the youth. The first set of information talks about diverse infrastructure and the importance of owning and not just renting. The second set of information talks about good design and the importance for our youth to understand this. And the third set of information talks about a new design ethos for our youth. A new design ethos we've come to call aspirational necessitation. So let's get to it. Diverse infrastructure and why it is important for our youth to understand and own and not just rent. Any software not developed by a diverse array from the ground up automatically renders the software biased. The three major operating systems we use today, Android, iOS, and Microsoft OS, were not initially developed with diversity in mind. As such, their subsets are also biased as well. Their frameworks, their APIs, and their developer kits. The utilization rate of our youth on these platforms are very high, whereas the production rate is very low. And in 2018, encouraging our youth to make more apps and learn how to code on other platforms simply won't be enough for them to keep up. We need to focus on something else, something fast and something big. You see, I mentioned operating system before, and let's just break it down in layman's terms. Think of an operating system as a community, think of apps as houses, and think of users as residents. When a community is first being built up, whatever norms are initially, or whatever rules are initially conceptualized when the community is first being built, usually stick. It becomes very difficult for a resident to come in and influence certain changes. Even if he or she galvanized with others that agreed upon a set thing that should change, it would be very difficult for them to change the community without certain things such as economic power, buying power, and political power. Unless they branched out and formed their own community. Now, for many of you in this audience right now, you might think that's very impractical and unrealistic. But you see, we're talking about the digital world. And in the digital world, if you can think it, and if you're ready to work hard enough for it, it can be so. So indeed, the answer is to build infrastructure. The answer is to focus on an operating system that works for the culture. In doing so, we're able to not only identify, but effectively and efficiently solve problems much better. It is said that the best stories are the ones told by the ones who experienced them firsthand. Any other story you hear after that is just a watered down version. And in creating an operating system, we're able to control the narrative and tell stories the way they need to be told. The second piece of information I would like to share with you is good design. As a young kid, I always realized that I was enamored of design. I still remember looking through architectural works of Zaha Hadid, product design works of Mark Newsom and Johnny Ive and Dieter Rams, and architectural fixtures of Renzo Piano. At a young age, I thought I understood the importance of good design on the micro in order to affect the macro. I would always notice how I noticed the curvatures and textures of paintings and shapes over my peers who didn't really notice them. At first, I just thought maybe they just weren't interested in it. But then I got into software. And I started to compare software, those made by minorities and especially people of color, and those made by people outside of the minority groups. I realized that there was a big difference. Whereas my peers would make interfaces that were very busy, other people would make interfaces that were rich with color, rich with fonts, and used icons over logos and just understood the nuances in the design. I further deduced that apart from building a unified and diverse infrastructure, our youth must also be instilled with the principles of good design, guides on how to design the world better. The third piece of information, probably the most important one, has to do with aspirational necessitation, a new design thinking ethos for our youth. If you look around you, you would notice that in the world, the products that are usually necessary for basic living are designed poorly. The products which are aspirational and not necessarily needed are always designed better. Isn't that crazy? In a world filled with so many problems, aspirational necessitation encourages our youth to design from a perspective of necessitation using the principles usually applied to aspirational products. There's no reason why an Apple iPhone looks so luxurious and nice and is well designed, and a lot of design thinking goes into actually making it, and roadblocks, street signs, buttons don't get that same level of attention. Aspirational necessitation encourages our youth to apply those same design thinking skills, usually attributed for mostly aspirational products, and use that to design for the new world. We must understand that yes, we must create infrastructure and we must control the narrative. But once we do, we must not make the same mistakes that those came before us made. We must remember to be inclusive, diverse, and help everyone else around us. For at the end of the day, we are one race, the human race. The three things that were mentioned before, good design principles, aspirational necessitation, and diverse infrastructure can help us dream of a better world for our youth. The actions we make today will affect the today of our tomorrow. Thank you.
Getting a great night's sleep is easier than ever.
Yeah, so I just Sandu is great. I hope y'all like the TED Talk. I love how he branded himself in a way to think of everything that he learned. He taught himself with code and the technology, and then he figured out his purpose, what he's going to do with it, with these skills he learned, and also not only what he's going to do with it, how he's going to be employed to gain the experience, and also how he's going to market himself as a consultant, make money, and in turn further spread this message, purpose. So when you think of careers in code, and you think of getting into the field, and that's what we're going to start talking about. I want to know from you guys, what are your goals after the class, after you graduate with using the skills that you've learned? Here we have the Apple iPhone, and then I put some information about how many people use the technology and who has a smartphone. So maybe that's something to think about when you're thinking about entrepreneurship, if you're going to lead into that or into job stability. So if anyone want to raise their hand and answer some questions of what kind of careers you think that you're going to go for and code, or a position in a job. Okay.
Start. I definitely want to solidify my skills. We've shown a lot of great things, but not a lot of time to really practice and solidify the skills. So that's my first step. And after that, I'd like to be able to do other freelance work or something.
Great.
So as well as working.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And there's nothing wrong with that too. And you learn a lot from freelancing. So my company, my business for 3 years now, started off from me freelancing PR while I was in school, in order for me to get the job that I wanted, which I have within my business group at the same time. So that's definitely possible. Anyone else?
I would like to be a part of this revolution where it concerns making technology-related products for people with disabilities, especially those that are visually impaired. Mm-hmm. So with the advances that we've seen with like artificial intelligence and things like that, there are a lot of really great products out now. I keep track of it, and I'm like, wow, I should have been a part of that team. I wish I knew enough to be able to do something like that. And so I'm hoping that with the skills that I've learned during the boot camp, that maybe I will get to be more team more development.
That sounds great, and that goes back to the idea of being part of the creation, not just consuming the things that have been created. But yeah, as a PR, there's like a whole lot of new ADA regulations and things like that. As far as with technology and web development, I see that you guys are learning, so that's great. Well, that's good to know. Anyone else wanted to share? I'll get you guys contact information So then move on to getting started. So for pinpoint things, you guys probably already ran through PR or marketing in the class. So first you want to do is develop your brand. So you definitely want to tell your story of why you're doing what you're doing and who you are, you know. So in a world where there's 100,000 job applications being submitted or piled up on an employer's desk, you want to stand out. And the only way you're going to stand out is by telling your story and defining your personal brand. So definitely that's something to think about and think about your purpose. The next one is building experience. So a good way to do that, build your experience, maybe volunteer or not volunteer, but start your consulting firm or whatever it is that your ideas are to help build your experience using the knowledge that you've learned. You can start by crafting up a one pager or even I saw your class schedule, yeah, putting all of that on a pitch sheet and basically pitching it to local companies and organizations, saying this is how my skills, how can I help you, and then figuring out how you can get paid. You may have to volunteer a few times in the beginning. It's all part of the groundwork, and then as you become more familiar and more comfortable, you can learn how to scale your business, your skills. And then the next one is create a media kit. So media kits is very important. They're usually online, or you usually have a link that can direct, or it's basically like an online resume where it'll have your purpose, your education, your skills, and your projects right on here. So just in case you happen to run into someone or you go to an event and they want to know some information about you, you don't have to say, oh, well, wait, I'll send you an email or you'll get my resume and the resume gets lost. It's a great way to have a direct link and a portfolio showing all your skills. And even on social media, your LinkedIn, like your Instagram, Facebook, you can utilize that online data and put it in your bio. So no, you don't actually have a business, you don't need to, which the URL link is usually for, websites. I would definitely use that other space for your online media kit. So when you're going requesting people, potential employers or, business partners or partners in general, when they go and look to accept your friend request or look you up, they have something to reference. Anytime someone call or email me or reach out for a partnership, I always look at everything before I even make that first email. I'm looking to see what kind of content they have online, who they are, anything. I always go to look first. So when you don't have something like that online, it's sort of kind of it can hinder, the opportunities, or even if someone was to tag you into something and then that person will look, you never know who's on your page or who's watching more of the story. And I've even been part of some research where they say that your first customer or client doesn't reach out to you until they've come across you 5 times. So that's just how it is. So definitely create an online media kit. And I can even share, I have brand kit templates and stuff I can share with you guys, and I'll send it to you. So that will help create your brand story as you're positioning yourself. Branding is not only for entrepreneurs and businesses, but it's a way to market yourself to employers. What makes you different than the next person that they're looking to hire, and how your purpose aligns with the company's vision. And then network. Don't be afraid. Nothing happens until you do. So no job is just gonna sit around and wait and look for you. And even that goes back to the 5 interactions before you get that call. Apply, but also be a creep. It's okay. So I was, even before my current job, I was already like in my current job. So I was like at every meeting, public meeting we had and things like that before. Maybe before I applied, I went to 2, and then after I went to 3. So yeah, be a creep. And and that's okay. That's okay because people want to know, they want to see, and then that way, when your name come across for an interview or come across for a job or RFP to do some coding consultant work, it'll be familiar, and they might not know you, but they'll say, oh, I remember that name, and even just from you saying that you came to my place and stuff. Is your name Dina? Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah, wow.
I've been creeping you.
Really? That's crazy. But even that's so crazy. But I figured once you said you came to my place, and I'm like, someone did message me about coding. Did you email me?
Not recently.
Oh,
I haven't
okay.
been creeping you recently.
But you have before?
We were supposed to meet up, and I was gonna come and take a look, on Sunday. But I actually.
Okay. I remember.
Yeah, but I think I congratulated you on ribbon cutting.
Oh, okay. Yeah. See, sometimes, you don't remember exactly, but then all of these little things line up. And a lot of times the other person don't know it's intentional. Like my employer probably don't really know that that was intentional. I probably don't know that being a creeping me or creeping on me.
Well,
But
I've also been wanting to congratulate you
Thank
because I saw the distinction that you got with forms.
Oh,
the
yeah.
So
Thank you so much.
I don't remember exactly
Yeah.
what forms, but I'm like, forms.
Yeah, thank you.
That's right.
Yes, I just became a member of board, so they have another sector called Board for Culture. I became a member, so I'll be at the board under 30 summit in October. That's what we're gonna talk about. Yeah.
She was so nice too.
Yeah, and they kind of like found me too. And who knows how many times they've been on my page. Thank you. Before that, but I always have like my link, even when you buy my Instagram, because I'm in the corporate world or government, and then freelance, because I do marketing and beyond, and I also have my business. I have a landing page that has buttons to help people navigate on how to contact me for what. And so that's something important to think about too. Who are you reaching out to? Who are you looking to reach out to you, reach back out to you, and how can you make the process easy for them to view your information, your content, or your resume, your project, things like that. Yeah, so do you guys have any questions on that part? That was basically the goal of it, is learning how to brand yourself. Someone said something?
You're coming and help shoot your daughter as
Oh,
she
yeah.
reminds us of our own daughters.
Yeah, she wanted to come today.
And really, my daughter's quite good.
She's like, you're leaving me again. Okay, yes.
And teared up that you're under 30, recognized by the board, have a daughter, a woman of color, you.
Thank you.
How? No, but if you had to sum it up in, I'm in awe. We've met too. I work in the north side of Cooperative Federal. We emailed,
Okay.
not met.
Wow, yeah. So,
Still in awe.
Oh, okay.
I'm just amazed.
Aw.
It's impressive.
Well, thank you so much. I guess, it goes all back to personal branding and really finding your purpose. Someone asked, what it is that I wanted to do. And I really couldn't answer that question, even though I had like all these skills, and back then I was just working in programming and operations helping people in healthcare or organizations diagnose and count with their software program. And when my boss had asked me, what it is that I want to do, she was like, dead serious, and I was like, I can't answer the question. The fact that I couldn't answer the question kind of bothered me, and it made me find my brand purpose. And so once I try to figure out, who I am and what do I want to do with it, what skills, even identifying what skills I have, you think that's like a no-brainer. Who you are, what skills do I have, what experience do I have, and also what knowledge do I have, An experience doesn't have to be sort of education. It can be real world experiences as well, things like coffee things. So just figuring out, how to combine all of those things into one and just getting out there and trying new things, not being afraid to. And I think that's it. Like I tried a lot of things and I'm not afraid to try things and new things and that's just the journey, I guess. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
So digital advertising is so important these days as far as getting your brand out there, getting your name out there. Of course, you get more bang for the buck because as opposed to sending out the paper stuff.
Yeah.
Get those repeated. So first, I want to let you know that your promotions team, your advertising team, they're doing a great job. I get stuff about Creators Lounge or you just about every week, if not every other day.
Oh, right.
So I don't know, maybe your people are creeping me.
Right.
But the other thing is, I wanted to ask you, are you working with a local ad agency or do you have a team in-house that's doing all of this?
So all of our marketing, and I think I saw something on your website or maybe in here about automation. Are you guys learning about that? No. Oh, okay. All right. Well, basically all of the marketing that you see is done by me. Yeah, but I don't do it. It's all automated. So I set my business up yearly. So to be automated. So I think automation is very important. I don't know how that would reflect in posts or technology terms, but yeah. So basically, it's best because I don't have to spend time trying to generate funds for my business. It's operating like an operating system. It revolves automatically. So I took 2 hours out my day in November and I set up my marketing for the year based off the calendar and holidays and events and different partners and programs around creators and business incubators and stuff like that. So it's set automatically.
Do
And
you use a particular tool or are you using like a couple of different things?
yes, I use MailChimp, which is really great. Yes, MailChimp is really great. Like, yeah, it's really cool and it's set to automatic. So when someone hits sign in, or subscribe, they automatically get a welcome email, and then all of the other emails after that are automated based on events and things that we have going on within the lounge, and depending on who clicks what kind of email listing they'll fall into. Yeah. So it's kind of automated. It's really good because it's less time. So if you think about freelancing or consulting after this, think about how you can help your client do more for less and how you can automate things for their business to make it easier. Even in my PR, another sector of the space is the curation team. And we do marketing for a lot of organizations. they really like the fact that we can come in and say, hire us at one time, and we'll special learning for the year. But pay us for the year. But you don't have to do anything. Yeah, so, that's pretty good. Any other ideas?
So there are like lots of different social media tools, and I kind of want to have to use all of them. If you had to like put them on like a hierarchy, which ones would you say are most important?
What are you using social media to for?
I guess to do this whole coding thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, to do what on coding? To sell yourself for employees, to get clients, to showcase your skills, or to code.
To do all that.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's skills to share the coding to.
So I would say it's important when you're looking for jobs, when you're looking for freelancers, as well as content, limit or be intentional about the things that you're sharing. And also share what you know too. It's okay not to have that much experience, but when someone looks on your social media profile, they want to see what you know. So social media is a good tool, and that's what I did too before I got my job. And now I shared things that I knew as far as housing, business development, economic development, just posts or blogs, or do something with what you know. Basically, that could be a YouTube, that could be a live every now and then, that could be a post, that could be a blog, that could be a graphic. I would definitely utilize the social media doing something with what you know to showcase the skills that you have to gain clients, to gain a job, and be intentional about the job that you're going after too. That goes back to defining your brand, and because they're looking, and especially LinkedIn is really good for recruitment. So you definitely want to have, even if on LinkedIn, if you're not really always on LinkedIn, just go put 3 articles up and then you're fine. Have one for this topic, one for this topic, and one for the third topic, and then you don't have to worry about it again. You don't have to worry about keeping up with it. Because then when they go, recruiters will search your LinkedIn first, and that's where they'll look. But as far as like organizations and freelancing, Facebook is good. But that answers your question. Yeah.
Sort of see where I'm interested in applying and see what they use and sort of work backwards from there to start.
Yeah. What are you looking to do?
I'm looking to get like an internship just so I can get my DP web and try it out and gain some more skills before I
Okay.
go full in.
An internship in what?
Well, I'm not really sure, honestly.
And that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. That's all part of the journey. Even if you were sure, you can start something. That's great.
I also wanted to mention that word of mouth, and definitely also how like my dashboard that I'm building for this class is probably only 90% done. None of my links link to anything really, not any of my projects, but I sent the link to my daughter and her husband saw it, and someone called me last week who was trying to establish he wants to set up a medical staff leasing agency within the next year. He called me because he wants me to do his website.
Right.
So I'm not even advertising right now. So he's like, I just talked to him about what I do, and he was like, yeah, I trust your son-in-law. He says that you can do this. So, that's happening.
Definitely important for who you know, and that definitely helps. And that goes back to networking, being just knowing that things aren't gonna come. I think the next one was just a statement. As a minority growing up in this era, we risk the chance of losing a seat at the table. That's from Idris. So that just goes back to being creator, producing, not really necessarily being utilized, and also networking, however you choose to translate that. And last is my contact information. Um, yeah, so I wish you guys much luck on your journey. Definitely start thinking about how you're going to utilize the skill, coding, technology to change the world or make an impact on whatever career or organization or business you choose to align yourself with. Um, yeah, so I think that's it. Do you guys have anything else? No? Sure. Positive.
Can you talk about your co-working? I don't know if you talked about the co-working.
Oh, okay. So the Creative Lounge, it's on Salina, and yeah, we just opened on July 23rd, and it's great. I had to network first, or I networked with over 2,700 members, and we kind of needed the space. It wasn't intentional. I kind of just listened, you know. When I started freelancing in PR and helping people with their video and marketing and PR, we sort of, more people started gathering, wanting to meet, wanting to connect, and then I started hosting pop-ups and networking events because I saw the meaning of more gathering, for like-minded people. And then as the tribe grew, and I was going back and forth from New York City, I was on an internship while I was back here freelancing, and I had my daughter working and building the creative lounge with it now. Yeah, as that grew, I just saw a better need for more need for the space, and just listen and just following that purpose, I guess. Yeah. And so with the Creative Lounge, it's kind of been hard, I can say, opening up a whole business. I'm an investor as well in real estate. Real estate, so I usually flip houses, which is great because I don't have to manage them. So I'm kind of nervous about having a space that I have to tend to, and a long-term investment. I invested in the space by myself, so 100% of everything in there came from me. I didn't have any grants or anything like that, but it's just sort of, I'm going back to that media pitch, only it's in real life for the larger picture that I'm going after. So just a proof of concept, even though it's real, But yeah, I do look to get larger buildings, larger spaces, more things. So
Because we all have memberships right now
oh,
in a co-working space, and the reason why I wanted you to go back to that is because when our memberships expire within the next month or two, that gives us another option of where we may want to,
all right. So
if we choose to go there. Right?
the idea of the Creative Lounge is for people to be their corporate professional, their business, and their social self all in one space all the time. Usually when you go to work or do work, you think of one place, or when you go to meet a friend or a client, you probably go to a coffee shop. And when you look at new business, you probably go somewhere else. So the idea, the concept of the lounge is to be all in one space all the time. So we have a lounge area for meeting people, meeting friends, meeting clients. Our lounge membership is $50 a month, and that's more social too. You still get access to our online network and also all of our program events. We have our career events, our business events, but we also have networking events and brunches everything, that's social to sort of have fun with and to use work and building a business is fun. And then we have our gallery membership, which is $100 per month, and that's just access to a workstation, being in a very like-minded creative thinkers. You have those people around you where you can bounce an idea off or pick their brain versus one to meet out and meet someone or, then figuring out that. So, and then we have our private studios, which we only have one month, and those are 200 a month. And so I hope to see you all or see you around. We have lots of things going on as well. So, lots of things happening with the new Chase funding we got for the city as far as like technology and business. So I hope to see some of you guys on that side. And yeah. So I'll here's my contact, take a picture or whatever, and I'm here anytime. And also look up Iger. He's so great. I've been following him for a while and very smart. And when you think about entering the technology field as sort of like a newbie or with these new skills, he's definitely someone to look into as far as changing things. Employers here aren't really seeing that. That's something that's going to change your portfolio or change your resume, give it a little hot sauce. Make you stand out. So definitely, or think about what your hot sauce will be when you're applying. Anything else? I think I went over. Should I go over? Oh, okay. Well, thank you so much for having me and my daughter.
Yay. What's her name?
Ilea, yeah.
Ilea.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Daria.
Yeah, thank you.
I sent out one of your contact.
Oh, okay, great. Well, have a good day.
Thank you, Daria.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye.
All right, so I think what we'll do at this time is we'll take our break now. We'll come back at 6:45 on the dot, and we'll get started. Great. See you at 6:45.
Who are they locked out? Did they say?
I mean, I just heard. Not me, I'm
I'm muted, but let me see. Is it?
So this week, we're going to be touching on state and state management. It's a pretty big topic. There's a lot that can go into it. It can be quite simple. It can be extremely complex. We're going to start out simple, which will quickly translate into something that's going to feel pretty painful. And when you reach a pain point, then you start reaching for a different type of solution, right? So when you do something in a certain way until you realize you kind of hit a wall and you're like, okay, well, this is getting kind of painful. I should probably rethink some of this. So we're going to get into a little bit of that. We're not going to go to the extreme. I'm just going to touch on a lot of these things. We're going to start out with a simple way to do state management. Then we're going to do a slightly more complex way, and then we'll eventually reach for another library. So we'll go down like 3 different paths. And we're going to all start at this app.js level. So if everyone has their solution open, open up. And just remember you'll need, figure out where I'm at. Need to go into our client folder. Need to npm start on that. And also the npm run JSON server. So we'll need to get all that stuff up and running. Excuse me. So look, I have my inventory showing up. This is all good. That's good. So let me know when everyone's there. Or just a thumbs up so I can see. Okay, thumbs up. Cool, good. You guys need a second over here? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right, so Gus will be at TA tonight. Okay, over here. So Dana and Dakir. Looking good. Dana, you need a second?
You can go ahead.
Okay. So a lot of the code that I'm about to show you, eventually we're going to back out of it. We're going to delete it. But I want to illustrate the first concept in state management. State is really just temporary data in your application, as opposed to like persistent data that's in a database. So when you launch your application, you have this concept of, okay, this is the state of my app as it exists right now when it was last loaded. During that time that it's loaded, this concept of state kind of floats around and you have access to it. And really what it comes down to is just some object somewhere that has key value pairs. Right? At the end of the day, state is really just a bunch of different objects or arrays or however you have it implemented. Typically in a React application, it's an object somewhere, either at a higher level or multiple different levels. And state management is really just the concept of, well, as the name implies, you're managing where your state exists and how you're updating it and accessing it. So when your app starts out really small, it's really easy to tackle state, especially if you only have a couple components. Your state could just live in that one component. Right? So as we did inside of, inventory.js, right? So we have our use state at the top. We have a data and a set data. My state for this component is data. That's the state of this component. So this component also is able to update that state by calling that set data function. And when our use effect runs for the first time this component is loaded, it fetches some data, it updates the state of that component, the internal state for that component, and that for this component is its state management, right? It's just at this particular level. So state management doesn't have to be the entire application, it could just be parts of it. So there could be lots of levels of state. I've come across some people that like to take every bit of state and throw it into the topmost element and manage everything there, regardless of what type of component it is. That may work for you, but as your applications get more complex, it gets really difficult to manage. If you're putting every single piece of data into state at some global level, every time that state changes, it wants to re-render your entire application tree because it's the topmost level. Now, React's really good about doing that. So that whole thing with if you're rendering arrays of components, you want to give each one a key, right? A unique key. And that's how React says, oh, has this changed? No. Has this one changed? Yes, I want to update that one. And that's all well and good. But as your component tree starts to grow and grow and grow, having everything all at the top, every single piece of it gets really cluttered, and it's easy to kind of have some bugs be introduced. So what I personally do is, for my rule of thumb is, if this component needs a piece of state, is this the only state it needs? Is it only this one bit of information? Okay, fine. Then it can live in just this component. If it's something that multiple components need, then it needs to live at a higher level. If it's something that all components need, then it needs to live at the top level. Right? It doesn't have to be millions of bytes of data that's flowing around an application. It could be something as simple as a username, a theme color, right? So some sort of piece of data fetched from an API that your entire application needs to know about. Are you authenticated? Have you done all these different things? Right? In our case, with this particular application, there's a couple of places that need to have the same information, at least access to the same information. Inventory and products, while they do take in, inventory and shipments, while they do take in different data sets, they all point to a products page, right? So maybe we should think about all of that. Now, this particular application is a pretty simple application. The eventual state management solution I'm going to put into it is a little bit of overkill, but as an application grows, it'll make more sense. So we're going to start at a very simple level. The topmost component we have is app, and we're going to start implementing state management at the app level. And to do that, same way we were using state before, we're going to import use state. And we'll say const we'll just call it app state, and then set app state. And we'll say use state, and we'll just do an empty object. So now our quote unquote global state at this point is just some empty object because we're at the topmost level, and let's say we want to get this access to this all the way down to another level. All right, so what could we put in here as a piece of default state? We'll say let's say the app's name, like the brand, right? Right now the brand is Byte. So our default state is just an object with a property of brand and a value of Byte. Now it's really easy to have access to it in the app component. So if I say header, and we'll do after the header, we'll do like an H1 tag because those are really large and in your face. And inside here we'll just say app state. Now this is an object at this point, right? So if I want access to that brand property, I would say app state dot brand. And that's not rendering because of my CSS styles. Let's move that down a little further. There it is at the bottom. So that came from state. Pretty simple. Let's say I want to pass that brand name down to my header. Well, now we need access to state from the header. So the one way to do it at this level would be to pass it down as a prop to header. Header doesn't take any props right now, so we'll have to modify that. So we'll go over to header. And the way we define props and function components is right inside the parameters list. So there's props. And inside app, we'll call this brand. And that's going to equal app state dot brand. We'll get rid of our H1 down here. We don't need that. All right, so now we're passing in a prop of brand, the value of byte, appstate.brand. And in header, we have props. So if I wanted to, say, control the actual brand logo up here, this top left element, then I would say props.brand. It says byte, just like it did before. It doesn't look like anything changed. But if we go back to app and change this to my app, you can see how that state flowed down through the props into this component and then rendered to that element. Does everyone follow that? Does that make sense? So it's very similar to what we were doing before. You're just passing in a prop, and you're rendering that prop somewhere.
You can name the prop whatever you want when you put it in.
There are some reserved words, but essentially you can, yeah, don't start with like numbers or anything like that. So it'll kind of, React will say, no, you can't say 1, 2, 3 prop. Like prop 1, 2, 3 would be better.
So it just knows that like after you put props there, that in the header tag, when you put brand, it knows that that's.
So what it's going to do is it's going to say, hey, I see you're passing me these props. One of the attributes of props is brand because you defined it.
Right.
So I'm going to throw that onto the props object that gets passed into that function. So in header is going to say, hey, think of it like HTML. Like these are all the HTML attributes. So you could say, yeah, if I were to say attributes instead of props, attributes.brand, and it's going to do the exact same thing. This variable name doesn't have to say props. It is props because that's what React says it is, but you can name it differently if you want to. The convention is to use the keyword props because then it doesn't look like a component anymore. It's like, oh, I don't know what this function is. It's just these attributes. So I'm going to set that back to props. But just to illustrate the point, that props object is passed in like that. I could define anything on here. I could say anything equals, well, yeah, right? And if I come into header, and instead of props.brand, I say props.anything, it's rendering that value that I passed in. Think of props as just this object that you're defining the keys and assigning the values to. So we'll put that back to brand, and we'll get rid of this useless statement. Okay, so that's great. What if we want to change the brand name and not just hard code it, right? Maybe we want to click a button and have that change state. Right, so let's think about that for a second. We're inside of header.js. Let's say somewhere in this header we want to have a button to be able to modify state. So we'll say after our second nav item, we'll put a button here. We'll just say change brand name. Let's see, I have this button. Anyone have any ideas how we think we could tackle this? How would I change? First of all, a button has to have an on-click. So we know that part. So when we click this button, something's going to happen, right? What should happen? How are we going to modify state? Any ideas?
Can we just go back to the definition of where we find brand? So how does it know what brand is it?
Right, because we're getting it from here. So if I were to click this button inside a child component, how would I be able to affect the component above it? Data only flows one way. I'm sorry? The state's already at a higher level. So what we would need to do is pass down a function that its child component could use to update the state. Right, so we already have that. We have set app state right here. Oh, sorry, I didn't understand what you're.
I mean, that's what I've heard it being called.
Oh, okay. Yep. So we could say, let's do this. Let's be, yeah. We'll say change brand. Now let's name it the same. Set app state equals set app state. So we're going to pass down that function to header. So the header now has access to this function that can change the state of our application. Here, oops, what did I just do? I'll make this a little harder. Does that help? I see people squinting. So right now we're just saying, hey, I'm going to create a new prop on header. I'm going to pass in this function set app state. I'm just going to name it the same name as the prop, or name the prop the same name as the function, so I can follow it. Inside header, now that I know it's on my props, I could say props dot set app state, and now I can pass in a new state. Now remember, state's an object, right? So I'll have to pass in an object. I'll say brand. We'll say my new brand. So now I have access to this function. I can call it. It remembers where it was defined, which is in here.
Is that an object inside the array?
This is an object, just an object. Oh, right here?
On the on-click.
The button?
Is that a square bracket? I'm sorry, on-click equals, is that a square bracket?
Let's do this.
So you know what, I can see it from here.
There we go. right? So the only thing we're going to do is we're going to call props.setAppState. Right. So if I go over to my app, I click the button. Hey, all right. I can't click it back, but I was able to do something. I was able to modify state. Question? Oh, okay. I thought you were raising your hand. All right. So now that's cool. What else can we change in the state here? Maybe I want, maybe this inventory, maybe depending on my mood, I want to change the text of this, right? So we could say, all right, let's go back to use state. We'll put these on a new line so we'll say inventory link. We'll just say inventory. And so we have another piece of state, another property on that state object. And so I need to pass that down too, right? So I'm going to say inventory link is equal to app state dot inventory link. I'll go into header, and now I can just say, okay, cool. I have access to props dot inventory link. And let's just go back up to here, and I'll just put some exclamation points so we know that it is rendering something different. See, hey, inventory, fantastic. I was passing that down. So maybe I want to change that, right? Maybe I click another button and it changes it to something else. Maybe instead of inventory, I should say, oh, it should be products list. So we'll just, depending on the user's mood, they could change the name of this link. Silly little app. It's causing us a lot of headaches because now we have to think about other things to do here. So, all right, so I click on another button. And this is going to say change inventory link text. And we'll do the same thing here as this button. Just copy and paste. But now we're not changing brand. Now we're changing inventory link. And this will say products list. Everyone following so far? Like we're just creating another button. It's going to dispatch that same function, but we want our new piece of state to say this. So we'll go in here and we'll click the button, and we lose our brand. Like, oh, I guess I should think about that, right? Okay, so why do you think that happened? Anyone want to guess why clicking this button changes only this state, and clicking this button changes only the other one? Sorry? Nope, we're using the state from app. That's part of it, right? Because we're reloading everything. But the reason why this one is only changing this one, and this one's changing only this one, is those are the only values we're passing in. This function, set app state, is going to change the value of this. That value is this entire object, right? So if I want to change both of them, I have to send both of them, right? So let's try that for a second. We'll see how this goes.
If you wanted to keep one the same and change the other one, you have to send what it already is, right?
Yeah. So now it's like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do that, right? So I say I want inventory link. Well, what do I want that to be? I want that to be whatever props that inventory link was. And then down here, well, I don't want to change brand here, so I want brand to be props.brand. Right, so I got to say, okay, I need to manage all this stuff. So now when I click OK, all right, cool. So what if we wanted to change the shipments link too. You see where this is going? Like, this is one way to manage state. If your application is only like 1 or 2 levels deep and you want to pass a couple things down and you want to manage all that, you can. Or you can do it at the component level. And this is the only component that has state, so we're only going to manage it here. You can pass props down, but maybe you don't want those child components to update the state, and that's fine. So a simple state management solution could be, maybe this is your entire application, and these are all the things that you want to do, and that's fine. You can keep it like that. But our application is a little bit larger, right? We have more things we want to do. We have things that we want to load as soon as the app loads. Eventually, what we'd like to do is on the shipments page, we want to be able to receive a shipment. We'll have to send a request to our JSON server, say, hey, this has been updated. Oh, and by the way, I have to redo my application here, and I got to do all these things. So this sort of state management solution, while it is simple and can be effective, typically you're going to grow out of this pretty quickly, right? If your application is 1 or 2 pages, 1 or 2 elements, no big deal, right? As soon as you start getting into something more complex, even if it's just 2 levels down, let's say inside header, there was another element in here that we needed to pass props down to, and that needed to change state. Well, now you got to pass those down, you got to pass the function down, you got to keep passing all these things down. That's referred to as prop drilling. Constantly drilling down and down and down the component tree, passing all these things. You make a change one place, now you got to make a change in all the other places. It's hard to manage. Or in the case of this particular setup, like we have a couple of different properties on this object that we're updating. Maybe there's more, maybe there's 20 properties. I don't want to have to keep saying, oh, inventory link is props at inventory link. My other thing is props dot my other thing. It gets really old. So what we can do is we can introduce, excuse me, another piece of state management like solution, right? So we want to manage 2 different, excuse me, I should have got water. We want to manage 2 different properties on this state, but we don't want to keep passing all of that stuff down, right? So first, let's start refactoring some of this. So it's kind of silly to pass in brand and inventory link separately because they're living on the same object, right? So we'll say app state equals app state, and we'll get rid of these 2 things. So now we're just passing in the app state, and we're passing in the set app state. So the 2 things that we created on line 10, we're just going to pass them down to the next component. So on here, this would be props.appstate.brand, right? Because we have props.appstate now. And appstate has the property brand. And down here, we'll say appstate.inventory link. So this looks a little simpler here. Still a little complex over here. But we're doing the same thing, right? All right. So when you're working with complex objects, managing the update can get a little hectic, right? If you only want to change one thing, then you gotta manage the other stuff. Now, if there's only 2 properties, we could solve this pretty simply right off the bat here and say instead of props.setAppState, we're going to do all these things, we could do something a little different. So I'm going to comment this one out. Let me throw some curly braces around this so I can comment that properly. And we'll say props.setAppState. We're still going to pass it an object. And what is this one for? This is for brand name. So we still want to change brand to my awesome brand. We also want to get all those other properties from all the other things. So before that brand, we could say ... app state, comma, and then the things we want to change. So do you remember how we destructured, or not, sorry, remember object rest and spread, or the array rest and spread? Right, so by putting those 3 dots in front of it, it's going to take all the properties of this object and spread them out into the object I'm creating here. Right. It's also going to take, after it's done doing that, it's going to take this property and change it to this. Now this property already exists in app state, but I wouldn't want to do it this way.
Because then it also has that.
Exactly, right? Last one in wins. So go back to this. So we're going to take all our pieces of app state, throw them into this, spread them into this object, and then we'll tack on the things we want to change. And we'll do the same thing down here, except it'll be inventory link. My products list. Sure. So inside our application, app state is now, oh, why is that? App state, app state. Which one is it complaining about? Oh, that's why. It's props.appstate. Sorry, my bad. Because it lives on our props object. Okay. So now we can see this still works, right? So that's another way to simplify this sort of solution. But there's another way to modify state for very specific pieces of state. Maybe you don't want to go through it, or maybe you don't want to do it this way. Maybe there's a bunch of different places where you need to do this, or the results of different actions taken that you want to change these things. Let's just say your object's getting really complex, and you don't necessarily want to pass your app state down all the time. Maybe it's just a button somewhere that updates state somewhere else, right? So you don't need to pass app state, you just need the function. So what we'll do for now is we're going to comment that out. It's going to break our app. It's not going to like us. And we're going to introduce another way to manage state. It's still a hook, just like use state, but this one's called use reducer. It's a little bit more complex. We're adding a little bit more complexity here, but our object in state is growing, right? It's growing into a young, budding object. It's going to propagate down into your application. So as we add more properties to this object, and maybe there's more places to modify that object from, we want to have very specific actions that we can take to modify those very specific properties in state. To do that, we're going to, in this solution, we're going to use reducer. And it's another hook just like use state, where we need to, let's do this. Let's say const. We're going to still call it app state. But our second one, we're going to call something called dispatch. And right now, we're going to need to define something else in addition to this. But we're going to say use reducer. Or use reducer takes two arguments. Use state took the one, right? It took our piece of state that we wanted to keep there, like this object. Use reducer takes as its first argument what's called a reducer function. Has anyone heard of reducer functions? Right, so we will go over that concept simply because we're here, so we have to do it. The second argument it takes is the initial state object that we want to have propagated into our application. Basically the same object that this is right here. Right? So I'm going to, first of all, uncomment that real quick just to grab this. Above the function, I'm going to define two things. I'm going to say const initial state. That's going to be equal to that object that we were using before. Now, if you don't want to type out inventory link or brand, you can change these properties to whatever you want. And you will have to, of course, for your applications if you use this. So we're going to define initial state. And the other thing we're going to define is a function called reducer. And that reducer has two parameters. First one is state, and the second one is action. So essentially what's going to happen is we're going to pass these into use reducer, and we'll just do that now, just to get our syntax there. We'll first pass in our reducer function. That's the first thing it's expecting. The second one it's expecting is our initial state that we want to have in state. This will be our object. This is still going to break because setup state's not defined anymore, but that's okay. So I'll give you a minute to, I know I was talking fast, typing fast, so I'll give you a minute to catch up there. So this method of managing state comes from the reducer pattern, which was introduced pretty heavily in Redux, where you have, anytime you want to modify state, you have to go through a reducer function. You can't modify it directly. So that's the rule. And then what happens is when this reducer function gets called, the first thing that gets passed to that function is state. The current state of your application, or the current state of whatever you're managing. That's the first thing that comes in. You don't have to worry about passing that in. It's going to do it for you, right? It's going to say, oh, I see that your initial state is this thing. So the first time this reducer gets called, by default, it'll be that thing, right? It's going to do that for you. You don't have to worry about that. The action comes from something that we dispatch to the store to affect a change in the store. That's where this function comes in, this dispatch function. So when we create these variables off of the result of calling use reducer, it's going to say, okay, your app state, that's your object thing that you passed in first, or as your second parameter. And I'm going to give you a function to update this state, but you have to follow this pattern, this reducer pattern. So every time you call dispatch, I'm going to pass you your current state, and then I'm going to pass into your reducer the action that you dispatched to me, right? So we're going to call dispatch. We're going to give it an action, which is essentially an object. And I have a little info graphic on that I will pull up in just a moment to remember where I put it. So this object, I should really find that. It's going to make a lot of sense to explain it. I'm going to stop the share just for a second because I think it's going to, oh, I just stopped it. Okay. I'll restart the share in just a moment. There's careers code, and then I'm sorry. Oh, we don't import it.
So app, the header app state equals curly brace app state.
Yes, we're passing it in as a prop. Here. Well, we're currently in a broken state, so we will get back to that. Yep. Can I share this? Share. Share the link. Copy link. I keep doing this. Okay, so I'm going to put this in Slack. So anytime we dispatch an action, it passes, you want to pass this type of object. 2 properties. First one is type. The value of that's going to be a string. You define what that string is. That's the action, that's the type of action you want to have applied to your store or to your state. Second one's the payload. And that could be anything. That could be a string, a number, another object, an array of things. Whatever you want to change in state, this is the thing that you're passing in to be the new value or to add to a current value. Like if you're adding something to an array, this would be the new element that you'd want to be part of that array. In our case, we'd want it to be a new string, the thing we're going to call the brand or the inventory link. These are the new values. The same way that when we called set app state, we passed in the new value, right? So we're going to use that. That's our payload. That's the actions payload. So let's see what this looks like here. So we're going to say,
You're not sharing.
oh, sorry. Let me bring that back up. Share. Okay. Let me bring this back up again. All right, so recap real quick. The action we're going to dispatch to our state for changing is we're going to dispatch this action here. The first property, and this is going to be a type. That's a string. The second property is a payload. That's anything we want to pass into our state. All right, so when we call dispatch, it takes that object and it gives it to reducer as this action here. Reducer is going to fire. It's going to say, hey, here's your state. Here's your action. What do you want me to do with it? So here's where we define what we want to happen. There's a lot of ways that you can go about acting on this action. The most common way is to use a switch statement. And what do we want to switch? Does everyone remember what switch is?
Provide cases.
Yes.
What did you say? I didn't hear it.
You can provide cases.
Oh.
Right. So the value that we pass into switch is the value that the case will match. Right. So we want to match on action.type because we have different types of actions that we want to dispatch. So we want to match on that specific action or that specific type. By default, if none of them match, we're going to return state. Nothing changed, so we'll just return state as it is. Now you do have the option of throwing an exception if you want. Like, hey, that's another way to say, hey, whoa, I'm passing something in that's not matching. Why is my app blowing up? You can catch it that way. It's totally up to you. I typically return state, but it's completely up to you. I know some people just throw exceptions because that's illegal. That's an illegal type. You can't do that. Right? Something that calls your attention to what you're actually passing in. In our case, pun not intended, but welcomed, we're going to look for a way to update our brand. So we'll just say update _ brand. And this is the typical type of string that you would see as a type. It's typically uppercase, separated by underscores. It's just a common convention that I've seen all over the place. It's a convention that we use at work. And typically these are set somewhere else as constants within the application. So we don't have to worry about misspelling something somewhere. We just import it and use it. But we'll get to that part later. Right now, all we need to do is look for an action.type that matches this string. Then we're going to return the new value in our state. But we can't just return just brand. We have to return the entire state because this is the entire thing that's going to be updated. So similar to how we did that before, we have access to our current state. So we'll spread all the properties of our current state into our new return object. We have to return an object because that's our initial state's an object. It should also be an object that we return. Otherwise, you may be blowing up the rest of your application, right? It's expecting an object, you're passing in something that's not going to match. So we'll take all the values in our current state, and we'll update brand with any guesses? Yes. Action.payload. Remember? Because that object is represented by this action variable. Right? So our action.payload is going to hold our value. And that's what we're going to return for updating brand. We also have another piece of state that we want to update, right? Which is update inventory link. And then we would do the exact same thing. But in this case, we'll say inventory link is, again, equal to action.payload, because it's the payload that holds the value that we're going to dispatch. Give everyone a second to catch up.
So this is using this reducer and state. This one of those situations where we're using something that the library provides, because I'm looking at payload and type. Like we never define payload and type in our code.
Not yet.
Oh.
Right now, we're just, this is what reducers is expecting. It's expecting an action to come in. Now the convention is to use action.type and action.payload. You could do action.data or action.some other property, but typically you'll always see, basically anywhere you go that uses this sort of pattern, you'll see action.type and action.payload. That's like the community convention, right? Everyone agrees on that because it makes sense, right? When you look at it, you say, oh, this is the type of thing that I'm dispatching, or this is the payload I'm receiving. It just, those words kind of just stuck.
Okay, can I just say this in my own words to make sure I'm understanding what we're doing?
Yep.
So you've got to change these, you want to change different things on your website than the client sees. So a reducer basically allows you to tell it to change nothing except this one thing.
Yes.
Okay.
We're defining which action is going to change which thing.
Okay.
Right? If I send an action where the type is update inventory link, I do not want to touch brand, right?
Okay.
That would be bad user experience.
And payload is the thing that you're changing.
Payload is the value of,
The
yes,
new value.
yes, correct. Any other questions on that before we go forward? Cool. I can't answer that question. Oh.
I'm beyond
Oh, my wife is always saying, "Where's my keys?" Like she I magically know where her keys are.
When I'm under stress, keys the first thing to go. But now I have like the time that you just have to keep your purse. So
but if I always say your purse, I'm 98% correct. So. Because it usually is. That's just good memory.
That's right. It's still impressive.
I've just said it enough. I think it's just ingrained. So in order to get these actions into this reducer, to be able to make these changes, we have to dispatch them, and that's where this comes into play. So use reducer gives us as that second element a function, which is essentially just this reducer function. It's going to call this reducer function, pass in the action we give us, and then we'll see our state changed. So with all of that being said, we still have our app state. We're still passing that down, but we can't pass down set app state anymore, right? Instead, we're going to pass down dispatch, because that's the thing that's going to allow us to update this new state management we're implementing. So we'll pass in dispatch as the prop name dispatch. When you do things like this, try to name them the same. If there's a really good case to name it something different, do so. But you're just going to confuse future you, 6 months down the line when you're trying to debug something. That's just my personal experience. You can be like, Joey, no, I'm going to name it Swiss cheese every single time. And I know exactly what that means. So up to you, but it does help when things are named exactly what they are. Because naming things is hard. And so you want to take it easy on yourself. All right, so we know that props is coming in. These should be fine, right? Props.appstate.brand. Those haven't changed, right? We're still using the same initial state object as we were before. But what has changed is this stuff here. So we're going to comment this out and comment this out because we don't want to do that anymore.
Wait, what's the first thing you comment? Oh, you want that.
Yep, so the set app state calls, just get rid of that stuff. So our app should still render, but nothing's going to happen, right? We still see my app and inventory because that's my initial state. We'll say initial brand, just so we know, and initial link. I don't feel like typing all that out. So we see initial brand and initial link. So we know that's our initial state. We're at a happy state right now. More puns not intended, but more welcomed. Okay. So inside header, we need to dispatch this action. And if you remember here, these are the types we're expecting. So we'll do update brand first. Come down to the click event for this one, and we'll say props.dispatch. Now dispatch expects that action object. First thing is type, and that is update brand. And I can't tell you how many times I've typed out udpate instead of update. It's the most misspelled word I've ever typed in my entire life. And I do it every single day, today included. And then the next thing is what? Payload. And whatever you want to call it. I'm going to change it back to byte. And now when I click change brand name, nothing else has changed. Nothing else happened, but I did change my initial state back to byte. Because when I dispatch this action, that switch statement is going to look for action.type. It's going to match. And I'm going to return all the previous properties of state, but I'm changing brand. I look back at my app, I see initial link is still initial link. I know I haven't changed it yet. So we'll do the same thing for update initial link. I'm going to copy that because I don't want to type it out. In fact, let's just do this. I'd rather not type this whole thing out. We're going to props.dispatch this one. This will be update inventory link. I'll change this back to inventory. And if everything was spelled correctly, I've changed my state. I've updated my state. Any questions on what we've done so far?
Yeah, can you go back over that? Like just the process?
The process? Sure. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to define our initial state, what we want to be the start of our application. What's all the data that when my app first starts up, what do I want this to be? What are my defaults? That could be user is logged in, false, right? We're not at that state yet. That could be inventory data, empty array. Maybe we haven't gotten that yet. And in our case, it's initial brand and initial link. Next, we'll define a function that is our reducer function. Reducer takes, when it's called, it'll be passed in state. React's going to pass in state for us. The first time it's called will be our initial state. The next thing it passes in is the action that you've dispatched. And then you just need to handle the case on case by case basis. Now you could do if action.type equals update brand, return this. You could totally do that, right? You could say if action.type equals update inventory link, do this thing. But as that grows, as that sort of pattern grows, you're going to get really tired of writing if statements, right? So that switch statement is going to look real friendly. Right? It's like that's very easy to use. The state management solutions that we use at work, we all implement this switch statement because it's just easy to follow. It's a nice convention, and you're only worried about. And there's some other niceties about that. So if you remember back when we were talking about switch statements, one case doesn't have to only be one thing. Multiple type, like in this, let me put it this way. If I were to say update inventory link and also update shipments link, I could do something like this. Copy this one. Now, this wouldn't make much sense for this particular link. This case statement will flow into the next one if we don't break or return. Right, so this one, when we get an action type of update brand, we're going to return this thing. That's it. This function's done. We've returned. Anytime you return in a function, you're done with it. Right, it's not going to go forward. Or maybe I do something else, but I don't want the next case to fire, so I break out of it. Right, I can break out of that switch. Now I'm down to my default. I can break out of it and go down to my default. Or maybe there's two different actions or actions that are dispatched in your application that affect the same thing. Maybe it's called something here and something else over here because maybe you're in the middle of updating your app and you're renaming things and you just want to do the same thing, but you're trying a new pattern over here, right? You're trying something new. But you both want them to affect the exact same change. So you could stack those case statements on top of each other. And since there's nothing between them, if you call an action or dispatch an action where the type is update inventory link, it says, okay, cool, I'm going to start here. There's no return statement and there's no break statement. So I'm going to go here and go to the next case. And then I'm going to keep on going down until I get to a break or a return. So you can stack all these together. And you can dispatch one or more different type of actions that do the exact same thing. Does that make sense? I don't know. Maybe like in the case that I just gave you, where you're updating part of your application, you want to rename things, maybe it makes more sense, but you don't necessarily want to update all these case statements yet, right? You can stack things like that. I'm just going to put this back and get rid of this case. But that's what makes the switch statement really nice. Ooh, that did not.
Could you say again why you put that break in? I know you took it out, but what was the purpose of that?
When I get to a break statement,
Yeah.
It breaks out of the switch.
Right.
It breaks out of the switch,
Right.
essentially. Yeah.
So if you did it in that case, it would update the brand and then return the state, just show you.
In this case, if I were to break, I would just break out of the switch statement altogether.
Oh, okay.
I'm done with it. I'm not going to do anything else. In fact, I don't think it'll even go to the default. It'll completely break out of the entire thing. Now, in this case, nothing will happen because I'm not returning anything, not doing anything. It doesn't make sense in our application.
Okay.
But in switch cases in general, you either return or break.
Okay.
Even if you call another function in your case, it'll still keep flowing down until you return or break in this scope. So let's move this back up to here. We're going to need to move this down. Get back to a state of normalcy here. Okay, cool. So we've got update brand, update inventory link. They're each returning their own changes to state. Everyone good with that so far? Cool.
I still have questions
Yep.
about action, because we're not like defining an object called action that has type and payload. So how does that work?
So where we're defining it is when we're calling dispatch. This is the object we're passing in. Remember, so in app, and I'll do one more thing to illustrate this point. That's actually a very good question. How do we know? How do we know that's what it is? There's another pattern you can do, which is called the action creator pattern. It's all its job is to create an action to be dispatched. That's it. That's all it does. So, and I'll do that next to illustrate this whole point. So what we're doing here is we're saying props.dispatch. Whatever we dispatch as that argument is going to end up in this action variable right here. So if I dispatch an object that says, I don't know, it could say prop and state. It doesn't match anything. We're not switching on those things, right? We're switching on action.type because that's the convention. So as long as you pass as long as the thing you're dispatching is an object that has properties type and payload's optional. Maybe you don't have a payload. Maybe you're just dispatching an action and you already know what it's going to do. The same thing over and over and over and over again. Maybe it's like load data, right? You don't have to dispatch an action necessarily or dispatch a payload. So this action is now going to be this object with type and payload properties on it. Does that make sense? So let's go back to that action creator pattern. And this adds a little bit of complexity, but as your application grows, constantly having to like create these objects all over the place kind of gets annoying, especially if you're dispatching the same action in 28 places. You have to write this thing out 28 times. You could probably factor that out, right? So let's do that. We'll do it for the brand. So we'll define a function. And we'll call it update brand, because that's what it should do. It should dispatch an action that updates brand. That's all it does. And there's two ways to address this action creator pattern. One is to create an action, and that's all it does. The other is to create the action but also dispatch it, right? So it handles the dispatching and creating of the action right then and there. All you have to do is pass it maybe the payload, the thing you want to be dispatched, the new piece of state. So the pattern we've chosen at work is to have it dispatch as well as create the action at the same time. Because if I have an action creator and it creates the action, well, it could just as easily dispatch it at the same time. There's no reason for it to return this thing and then dispatch it and do all these other things. So we'll use that pattern. It's pretty common that I've seen that people use. That's kind of why we adopted it. So this function is going to do two things, right? It's going to create an action and then dispatch it. So we'll do it the verbose way first. We'll say const, we'll say update brand action equals. And what are the two things in the action? Type, right? And our type is update brand. And our payload, for now, we'll just hard code it as byte. So we've created this action. And instead of returning it, we are going to dispatch it. So we'll need to dispatch. And we'll dispatch the update brand action.
And what's the difference between return and dispatch?
So if I return it, I'm returning that object to wherever the function is being called.
Okay.
I'm just going to dispatch it right over to the reducer or the,
Okay.
what I'm using for state management. But there's one thing that's missing here. So I can dispatch this thing and that's fine, but dispatch in this scope doesn't exist, right? It's not magically going to go down and find dispatch down here because as you can see, function app, which is our app component, dispatch was created in this scope. My function up here is in this scope. I could define this function inside my other function, but you can imagine that's probably going to get pretty crazy, right? Especially if you have 28 different actions you want to dispatch. So we need a way to get dispatch into this action here. And if you remember, even this pattern down here where we're passing in dispatch, you can pass around functions just like anything else. It's what's called the first class citizen or first class objects, right? First class object. I think they're interchangeable.
First class object means it can be returned from a function or passed to a function.
As a value. Yep. He's our guest TA tonight.
Yeah, I'm auditing the class. I'm trying to deal with some React stuff myself.
We have an audit. All right.
By the way, fun trivia. We made too many action creators. We made action creators everywhere, even when there was like only one place that would ever dispatch that action, and we're like actually removing a bunch. But you still want them for whenever you're reusing the action.
Yes.
It gets very tedious.
Yes, absolutely. If you're only ever using it once, you can just dispatch it.
Yeah, we've got like hundreds of wrappers that are just like one place only.
Yeah, we have a guy on our team that likes to do that. It's like you look at his action creator file and there's like 38 of them. Like, oh my God, you're absolutely complex. Like, no, I'm actually only doing this one time. Like, okay, cool. You do you. Don't ask me for the peer review. So that's okay. We get along. All right. So where was I? Oh yes. So we can pass dispatch around just like any other value. So we need to get dispatch. Well, first of all, we need to be able to call our update brand, right? So we need to have that accessible. So there's a bunch of ways that we can do that as well. We could say, let's just add another prop, right? Let's just go down this road. We're going to say update brand equals the function update brand. And inside, now it's a prop, right? We got props.update brand now. So instead of doing this, we could say props.update brand. We're calling that action creator. But we still need to dispatch something. So we know we have access to dispatch right now. And that's props.dispatch. So if I pass in props.dispatch as an argument to that function, now it's available right here. Now it's in scope. Well, it's been passed into my scope. Did everyone follow that, or do you want me to do that again?
Do that again.
All right. So as a prop, I'm getting update brand. That's a function. I know that because in app.js, I'm passing it as a prop. And I have it highlighted here, and I can see it's highlighting up here. So I know it's the exact same thing.
You don't need parentheses at the end of that?
No, because I'm not calling it yet. If I were to put parentheses here, it'll invoke it immediately. I don't want to do that yet. All I want to do is pass it down. Something else is going to call it for me, right? I don't need to do that just yet. That's the difference between putting the parentheses there or not. When do you want it to be invoked, right? If it's not now, don't put them on, right? Pass it down. So inside header, come down here, props.update brand. Now I can call it, but I need to pass in what's going to be doing the dispatching, right? the action creator will create the action, but now I need something to dispatch it. Well, that's my reference to the dispatch I've passed in props.dispatch. Remember over here, we have dispatch equals dispatch. Now it's on the props object. I could say props.dispatch, and that's the reference to that function. So I'm passing functions around, musical functions. So, but now that exact same dispatch function here is available here. And now it'll actually hit my reducer. And just to make that absolutely clear, I'll just say byte dispatched. Let's go over to our app. We can see it's byte dispatched. I know it came from that action creator. Now this pattern is nice when you need to reuse a lot of things. Putting it all in one file like this, like right in my app file, if that's the only dispatch thing I'm doing, okay, I can live with that. But if I have 38 of those things, right, I'd want to create a new file, and that sole file is just to have those in there and export them out so I can import them wherever I want, right? So for example, with inside our client or inside our source folder, we'll create a new folder called actions and a new file, action. We'll just say action creators, because that's what they are. I'm going to take this function out. So I'll just cut it out, paste it in here, and throw export in front of it. So I'm exporting this function, right? If I have more action creators I want to create in here, I can export each one of those. So now I don't need to pass update brand in here anymore, right? Because it doesn't live in this file. I can't do that. I can go right to header.js. Just like anything else, I can import it. Oops. So now that I've imported it from here, I can import that into anything that needs to change the brand, right? I don't have to pass it down as a prop anymore. I've reduced the amount of complexity in my component tree structure, right? I've bypassed all of that. So while I am dealing with more complex state, a lot of times when you're dealing with that complex state, your app tree gets simpler, right? It's less kind of congested, right? You're only importing the things you need in the places you need them. Now you don't have to pass it down 20 components deep anymore, it sounds like a nightmare to do that. But there's one thing we do have to change, and we need to get rid of props in front of update brand, because now we've imported that, so we can call it directly. But we still need to pass in dispatch. That has to happen, right? We still need a way. We still have to have a way to get dispatch into it. We can't put dispatch by itself in another file and export it and import it. It doesn't quite work like that, because the reason is that it's coming from this call right here. So because we're creating it here, we have to find a way to get it in there. And in this pattern, this would be the way to do it here, right? So now if I go back to my app, everything still works. The only thing that's changed is that I've now imported that from another file, called it, and passed in dispatch, rather than passing down as a prop, calling it and passing in dispatch. And any questions so far? Is this making sense? Does any more clarity need to be had with it? It's starting to get a little complex.
Yeah.
Right?
Right now.
Can you
Remedial. Shut
do
off.
like the flow of it? Like when action goes to dispatch or what, like?
Just follow the flow of the app?
Yeah, that hidden
Sure. we'll start from app, and I'll even change my files in the way that they'll be called. So we'll start at app. I'm sorry, the order that they're up here. First thing we're going to do is, are we good on where we've created these things, the initial state and reducer? We've defined those, right?
For me, yeah, where action meets dispatch.
Right.
How they're talking in the background.
Yeah. All right, so we've created initial state and reducer. We've defined those, right? Inside our application at our top level, we're saying, okay, I'm going to call use reducer. I'm going to pass in reducer initial state, because that's what it's expecting. A reducer function is some sort of initial object or whatever we want to hold in state. It's going to give us back a reference to our state and a reference to that function that we can dispatch actions with. Next, we're going to say, okay, we're going to throw that down into our component tree, because somewhere along the line, something's going to need to update state. So in our case, we're passing it into header. App state goes in as app state. Dispatch goes in as dispatch as props. So now in header, we have props.dispatch and props.appstate. Here we're just displaying the value, right? Props.appstate.brand. That's all we're doing, nothing fancy there. Down here, we're saying, okay, when I click this button, I want to dispatch that action to change that value in state. That's going to be my brand. So I've created this action creator. Its sole purpose is to dispatch this action. That's its whole purpose in life. It's already defined. It's the easy path. No questions. I export that so that I can import it in header. And then I call it. But remember, this is expecting some sort of dispatch function to handle my action. So I take props.dispatch and pass it to update brand, and that calls it for me. Now, when that happens, React's going to go, okay, I see that you've dispatched this thing. It's related to this reducer, use reducer function, which is related to this thing here, which happens to be this, using this reducer function. Right? That's on this line, right? This defines the origin point where dispatch is going to do its thing. Then when it dispatches, internally React's going to go, okay, I see this action you've got coming in that you've dispatched. I see you have a reducer defined. Awesome. I'm going to call that reducer function. I'm going to take your state, pass it in, and I'm going to take your action that you just dispatched and pass it in. Then I'm going to come to my switch state, and it's going to say, okay, what's the type? Cool, it's brand. I'm going to return the new state of my application. All the previous properties plus the thing you just passed me, and make that the value of my brand key. And then it just re-renders the application.
But this time, app state is the new one.
This time, yes.
And the next time you call dispatch, it's going to get the new one, not the initial. So like after you've changed it,
Correct.
It's going to be handing the new state along to the next time you call the action.
That state persists.
Yeah.
Right, the initial state is gone now.
Initial state is a one-time only deal. That's it.
Right.
After that, if you change state, it remains until you change it again, or you reload your entire application. Then it's start over, reset.
Returning state, not initial.
Correct. Yes, we're returning the state we want to see in our application. And then when it re-renders the app, because we're at the app level, it's going to say, oh, because of this, I'm going to re-render this component and all its children. And React's going to say, where has this changed? I see there's a reference to brand over here. I'm going to change that to the new state that I see. And it'll leave everything else the same. Does that flow make sense? I know this is a lot of typing and it's a lot of, but it could get worse. We could have gone back to that old way where we're passing everything as props. This looks a little nicer compared to that, right? We can kind of see some benefits, right? I can export this out over to here. All I have to do is import it in this spot. Now I can handle all kinds of different case statements to handle all the different myriad properties I want to update in state. The only thing this is not doing at this point are asynchronous calls, right? We want to fetch stuff from our JSON server at some point, right? This pattern, while is great, we need to do something else to make that happen, right? So this is all synchronous stuff. There's no asynchrony here at all. We're not fetching anything. Those are asynchronous actions. We're not doing gets or posts or patches or anything like that. So in order to do that, we'll have to take it one step further, which is what we're going to do tomorrow. So I know this is a lot tonight. There's only 15 minutes left. So then that's not enough time to go over that sort of thing. Tomorrow, we're going to introduce a library that's going to do state management for us. It's a very simple library. And before we use the library, we're going to talk about a concept called context. This library utilizes context. And context is nice because imagine you have, well, the tree of components that we have now. Let's imagine that was 20 levels deep, right? You could import update brand 20 levels down, but guess what you still have to do? You still have to pass dispatch 20 levels down. The pattern's nice for shallow apps, shallow trees. But as soon as you start getting more than like 2 or 3 levels deep, it's going to become painful, right? Context is a way for us to pass data from one level infinite levels down to the level where we want to access it. The only stipulation is that wherever you define that data, it can't go up. It can only go down the tree, right? So you can't shoot it back up. What you can do is you can define where your data lives, and you have something that's called a consumer that's going to consume that data. As long as that consumer is somewhere down the application component tree from its source, it has access to it, which is nice. We can bypass 20 layers of component tree levels. Get all the way down to here. We don't have to pass things down, drill props down all the way. We can pass it all the way around. Context lets us do that. And your homework tonight is to read about context. You don't have to fully understand it or fully get it, but in the same way that we had you read about hooks, was it hooks? Hooks and sorting. Oh yeah, we still got to get to sorting. The same way that you read about hooks, you're just going to read about context. Try to follow along. You don't have to understand the whole thing, but just to get the terminology in your head, it's going to look familiar tomorrow. Right? So that will be homework for tonight, and I will post the link. The nice thing about React documentation is their official docs are spectacular. Like they really, really are. I highly recommend navigating the site and just looking through it. So context. So we'll go into context tomorrow, and then after we go into context, I'm not going to go like spend all day on it or all afternoon on it, just enough so that using this new library is going to make a lot of sense. Right? It's going to simplify a lot of things as well. And I'll also have a disclaimer on that library tomorrow as well. It'll make more sense after we talk about context. Right, so there's a lot of state management libraries out there. This is one of many, right? We're not going to use Redux. We're going to use something different, but it uses the exact same principle as Redux, but with less initial boilerplate. That's all I'll say about it for now. I don't want to spoil it.
So intriguing.
So intriguing, yes. It's something I use all the time. So I'm intimately connected with it in such a way. So any questions on anything we've gone over tonight?
No, could you put the header.js code back up?
Yes,
Copy
absolutely.
and paste it or wherever's easiest.
I'll put all of this up into the repo as well.
Okay,
Will that be good?
yeah.
Or do you want to copy anything right now?
I was just gonna look at what I got.
Okay, I'm gonna get rid of these commented
Okay.
things, if that's okay with everyone,
Yeah.
because we're not using them anymore, and that was a painful reminder of the old way that we were doing state. All right, so I'll leave header up. Oops. Oh, what did I just do? There we go. At which level do you want to see it? Right down here?
Well, you can start at the top. And just
Okay.
work my way there.
Any other questions in the meantime? Okay.
Oh,
So we're good for now? Okay, cool. So read up on context. At least glance through it, get familiar with at least some of the things that they're saying, and then we'll see y'all tomorrow. You get 10 minutes back. All right. I'm gonna end the stream.